is set to make an appearance at a Commons committee investigating whether he knowingly misled MPs when he insisted COVID guidance had been followed at one of the parties in Downing Street.
Yes, he's going to make his appearance, unless he's airbrushed out, of course, in a few weeks from now. But the Partygate saga marks, of course, the beginning of the end for Boris Johnson as Prime Minister. ITV's UK editor, Paul Brand, who's here now, broke that story. It was his exclusive. And he's now uncovered even more shocking claims from inside Number 10 as part of his podcast series. Here's a taster.
The guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times.
Every word of those denials would become subject to public scrutiny. But remember, in this series, we're able to take you inside Downing Street to reveal how those working in Number 10 were privately reacting to the video too.
The atmosphere was like someone had died. No one was talking to each other, doors were shut. Everyone was just shocked because this effectively blew the gasket.
Paul, I suppose one can get used to anything, and we've sort of got used to Partygate, but it's easy to forget the impact your story had at the time. And here we were being told on a nightly basis by the great and the good and the Prime Minister we had to segregate, we had to isolate, we couldn't touch each other, we had to wear our masks. And all the damn time they were having knees up at Number 10. I mean, the impact of that story. How did you get onto the story?
Well, I mean, it was a long process, but as you say, this story was never about cake and carver, as exciting as some of those details were. It was about truth and trust in politics, and for the first time, we lift the lid in this podcast on how we got to that truth. And you hear from our sources, three of our sources, who talk in their own words about why they wanted to blow the lid, why they wanted to leak some of the information, and how it felt to be at the eye of that storm, to be working in Number 10 and everyone trying to find out who you are, who is the leaker, who is the mole.
Yeah.
An extraordinary moment. We hear from journalists like yourself, Susanna, about what it was like to cover that story, and, of course, from people who lost loved ones who talk about what it was like to relive that pain when you're watching this story explode in the headlines and you're thinking, I couldn't even be with my loved one.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, we discussed, as part of that podcast, the reaction of viewers because, by and large, people were sticking to the rules. You know, there was adherence at almost 100%. And all of a sudden, you were revealing that wasn't the case at the top of government or in parts of the civil service. People were absolutely sickened. We got those messages every day during the crisis. Paul, it's not enough for you to have reported on what happened then. You actually have new information, don't you, to bring to this?
Yeah, because this isn't just about the past, it's also about Boris Johnson's future, because
Yes.
we're discussing at the moment, aren't we, about whether he might try and make a return as Prime Minister if Rishi Sunak suddenly hits the doldrums. And actually, this podcast contains new revelations about what he knew potentially about the party, or at least new claims about what he knew.
Because he's always denied any knowledge of them at all.
He's always denied any knowledge, and yet in the podcast, for example, one of the big claims is that he was at an event and joked, this is the most unsocially distanced party in the UK right now.
He said those words.
He is alleged to have said those words. He hasn't denied it when we put it to his office subsequent to making the podcast. So if he wasn't aware of rule breaking, as he said to Parliament, you know, no rules were broken, at least I wasn't aware of any rules being broken, why was he joking about social distancing rules not being adhered to at that party? And this all matters for this Privileges Committee, which is investigating and meeting today, actually, to look at the timetable for investigating whether he misled MPs.
How much of what happened with Partygate, in your journalistic opinion, is because of the personality and the character of Boris Johnson? For example, had it been Theresa May who was Prime Minister at that period, do you think it would have happened?
Well, this is a key question because it's part of the character of Number 10, isn't it? And who's at the top setting the rules? And he always said, look, I wasn't aware of the parties that were happening literally downstairs, because he lives upstairs, doesn't he, in the flat in Downing Street. But would Theresa May really have allowed that kind of culture to take hold?
I think she would have gone spare, to be honest, if she'd heard about it.
Her character was, you know, she wasn't particularly into parties or socialising anyway. But so I think there are questions there about whether Boris Johnson allowed this culture to take hold.
Also,
of course, he just says he wasn't aware of it.
Well, you have spoken to somebody who said that staff were shocked when he denied that he knew anything about the party.
Yeah, this is one of the most interesting things about the podcast, is being able to hear from the sources who were obviously watching inside Number 10 as the story was being broadcast on the news that night, and they're all sat around watching. And he talks about their reaction in Number 10 and what that was like, and the fact that they started shredding evidence, he claims, immediately as soon as those claims started coming out. corroborating their stories, preparing for the Metropolitan Police investigation and Sue Gray's investigation.
So, brand new allegations, brand new, what appears to be evidence, on a brand new podcast. How do people access the podcast?
So it's available on all platforms. You can go to the ITV website right now and find it. We should just say the Cabinet Office, by the way, claimed that the Sue Gray investigation was very well carried out, very efficient, all above board. Boris Johnson hasn't denied the claims in the podcast, but says, you know, he's very proud of the work that was done in Number 10.
Andrew, Kevin?
This is really, really interesting because there's still a great number of Tory MPs who think Boris can come back.
Yep.
He lost his job because of some of Paul's revelations.
Nadine Dorries is leading the campaign.
Yeah, but when he goes before this Privileges Committee, if the Privileges Committee finds he's knowingly misled Parliament, he could be out of Parliament for good.
Yeah, he could be suspended, and it could be a by-election in his constituency. He's not coming back, and the reason he's not coming back, all this comes back. And the Tories are in a mess. They'll be in a worse mess if they exonerate Johnson.
What's it called, Paul? The podcast?
It's called Partygate, the Inside Story.